From what I've gathered, androgyny, body dysmorphia, and Crohn's disease have all led to Perfume Genius's fixation on formlessness, this desire to avoid having a strictly defined identity or physical manifestation, and just present the loose globs of energy that he can sense inside of himself. His lyricism references this, and on top of that, his very cryptic, enigmatic writing style certainly complements it, and his vocals, which are the most distinct and defining part of his work to me, have this totally mutated tone to them, and when he sings, all I can picture is this blank alien whose bones can reposition in his body and whose loose, flabby skin can shift around, and his voice also carries such vulnerability and can wrinkle into a vibrato oftentimes, and when it does, it's like he's curling into a ball, putting his head in his hands, and you can sense how he's swollen by salty tears. Like, he comes across as touchy as a person can be, as if the slightest poke to his emotional receptors would trigger the most violent chain of reactions, or just straight up take him out instantly in a monsoon, but at the same time, utterly unafraid and unashamed of that. When he talks about his music, I get the sense that he's completely broken down the filter that most people have that prevents them from addressing pain, and I think that's the most empowering part of him as an artist to me. And again, the way that he writes, I feel, gives the listener this uncomfortably full awareness of how much weight their body holds. There's so much potential for it to hurt you, yet you have to walk around with it every day. We really are just slabs of meat to the universe. And playing off of that is how we're born needing affection, but it's not always available and can so easily be ripped away after it's found. And his most fragile tracks have the effect of lullabies by moonlight, because you sing those to children trying to settle the turbulence of the past day, or ultimately hopelessly trying to ease every burden that they've been destined to carry from birth before they really understand it. And to me, Choirs has always been an essential track from him for how it suggests that even the most subconscious of places where the default should be peace can be corrupted by enough anxiousness. And I have to imagine what he's deemed this preoccupation with the spiritual realm comes from his desire to just transcend from all of this, because he can't do so grounded on earth. But because it feels like human touch and love has more effect on him than anything else, when he does have the real thing, it yields this violent, dangerous level of passion, and that's what No Shape was about for the most part. It twists your physical, naked form to seem like an incredible opportunity, because you have the potential to sacrifice it to someone else. Wreath, for example, feels like all of this fervor just bubbling up inside of you, starting to make your blood pump, and it feels like it could split you open and all burst out at any second, but it never does, and the way that it keeps you in that state the whole time is almost frustrating in a good way. And it definitely made sense that this was his most sonically hearty record yet. Each instrument had such a bold presence in it, and most of them felt like they were being dunked into gloss, but it also had this organic click-clack to it, and these orchestral wheezes poking through it. It was quite satisfying, but earlier on in his career, Perfume Genius's tracks were more minimal, and the progressions were loose, so it gave the melodies the illusion of being suspended in air, so you had to take them up and soak in the moment, but luckily, he definitely knows how to write powerful ones, and I would say this record is about as dense as No Shape, but many of the instruments feel soft to the touch again, like wisps of cotton or insulation. You have these glistening pianos and string sections that are light as chiffon and can get quite sensational and climactic, like where they pop up on the second half of Whole Life after everything just opens up like a paper fan and all the added instrumentation starts to twirl around like a skirt. Hadris's vocal performances on this record show a lot of versatility and can fondle the ear quite intimately, and that quality of it becomes especially disquieting when he simultaneously sounds like he is just hanging by a thread, about to crumble into pieces, like on Borrowed Light, One More Try, Just a Touch, or on Leave, whose harps are enchanting, but those breathy grumbles and whispers almost sound spiritually disturbed, as if some sort of incantation backfired and ended up summoning these specters that possessed him. And the track's really quite minimal. It feels like it takes place somewhere solitary, like an antique room where everything's worn, and plus his vocals also kind of have the consistency of cinders or ash from a fire that could have taken everything out at one point. There's definitely a sense of claustrophobia to it, like a bunch of critters were just released into the room where he's trapped, or the wolves and foxes howling toward the end represent this internal chaos, and only he can hear them. every part of the track is blood-curdling. Meanwhile, One More Try's guitars feel like they're blurring both ends of your peripheral vision together and raising you up, levitating you in a way that is actually peaceful, and its drums and dainty jingles are exquisite. They're sharp and fine as the branches of cherry blossom trees. Just a touch's guitars feel like fingertips gently touching the skin as the silken bass reaches down and caresses it, and the drums have this satisfying little thud as well. These are a few of the sonic moments that shift minutely but do so consistently and engagingly, so a little bit of focus will go a long way. Then there are these elements of the production that feel legitimately disorienting and nauseating by their weight. Like the bass ramming itself into nothing at all feels like it's hardening your perception of everything and your ability to process thought, and the lump of shoegaze guitar surrounding Describe feels like a brick over top of your brain, while the guitars underneath prick the skin as finely as little thorn bushes. And there's a rustic, agonized twang to a lot of the guitars that this record uses, which I think gives it a distinct edge in the Perfume Genius discography, and the writing recalls these situations of immediate intimacy that more often than not didn't sit right in Hadrius's stomach once they were over, and even though you kind of have to rely on the imagery because it can get a bit vague and scattered and tough to discern, that parallels how old memories exist in your head, and most everything has a murky tint to it, like a certain amount of despondency. Like on Nothing at All, the lyrics suggest that he's just stopped having standards for himself and who he's with, because 99% of what life has to offer is just irrelevant to him. He's just looking for immediate fix and someone to share in that misery with, and it's pretty gut-wrenching. But because sorrow is so prevalent in the track list, a moment like Without You feels that much more precious. On this track, he has this clear, almost rose-tinted perspective on dealing with body dysmorphia, actually. And I think, accepting any general past traumas still trailing behind him, they've started to look like something he can grapple with and make useful, because every week or month that passes, they fall back in his head a bit more and get closer to shriveling up and decaying, and in this moment, any progress that he's made since then actually looks significant. And I think the sonic representation of this is exactly accurate. It evolves pretty rapidly and confidently, but maintains these chirpy strums throughout, and there's a moment about halfway through where these additional guitars swell up, and it just feels so rejuvenating, like you just open your curtains to let light in through your window. I think that problems can arise on this record when tracks that are trying for a subtler appeal are combined with progressions that are just a bit clumsy and graceless. Like Moonbend sadly is anything but gratifying to me. It starts off very minimally with these super diluted plucks that I can just imagine slowly falling out of an eyedropper. Then there's this outroll of woodwinds and classical guitars that are lovely, kind of fairy tale-esque, and both come together at the end, but just wind down so prematurely and just kind of dawdle there. Meanwhile, Nothing Else rises to the occasion and carries it. His falsetto just kind of stiffly hovers over the whole thing, and the lyrics don't really add up to anything. It's kind of awkward, it just feels like the track never really got started, and I think my problem with Jason is just how the main vocal melodies used get a bit numbing, even though I love the story behind it. And I also love how Some Dreams suggests that constantly being in your head, perhaps to get on a creative streak, can kind of impair your relationships and your perception of social situations, and the way that the distorted guitar and piano clinks represent the hysteria that can give you, but I wish they lasted for a bit longer, or there was something more before the climactic crash down of the drums and wretched aftermath. And I feel similarly about the way that Describe just flatlines into an ambient landscape without remote warning halfway through. It didn't necessarily feel like it was done building up the momentum that it had going at this point. And even though some songs here are such clear misfits in the track list, and I almost struggle to wrap my head around why they're here, they're some of the most stimulating moments on the whole thing. Like, On the Floor takes this blissful 80s synth-pop angle, really calling to artists like Tears for Fears, and the jiggly guitars on this track sound like jello or insect larvae being pulled apart and sculpted with in different ways, or maybe like suds of soap. And Your Body Changes Everything has these puffs of woodwinds and curt, intense strings, and Hadrius sings in his lower registers. And there's also this wall of drums that massages your ears and moves quickly as a serpent's tongue twitches. And the track on the whole is really quite dry, like it belongs in a film about the Sahara Desert or something. So yeah, I do think that this record is close to the edge of being too scattered, but simultaneously it's got striking moments and exquisitely beautiful moments, and this wouldn't be the first time that it's felt like Mike is just rolling out ideas as they come to him, so it can make for quite a varied, kaleidoscopic listen. It just depends on your perspective.